Hello and welcome back to the Songwriting Idiots podcast, the show where every month two idiots try and write a song in a genre and on a topic decided by you. You can find out how to get involved at the end of this episode, but this very episode of the podcast is going to be quite a bit different, in fact.
This is not your normal Songwriting Idiots episode. This is in fact a special episode that we wanted to share with you about the tools and equipment that Ralph and I use to create the wonderful musical masterpieces that you hear every month on the Songwriting Idiots podcast. And of course, no Songwriting Idiots podcast episode would be complete without an accompanying beer. So Ralph, what beer have you got today?
Actually, quite a special little something. I told you yesterday. I went to the shop yesterday to get something, and I found a beer from a monastery that we've visited a couple of years back in Bavaria. It's called Kloster Cheyenne from 1119. So, promising? We shall see. What are you having?
So I'm going to have to disappoint you. No. I'm going to have to disappoint you in that it's not even a bottle today.
Oh, no.
Because we are recording this podcast on a Sunday, and for those of you listening outside of Austria, you may not be aware that on Sunday it's literally impossible to buy anything on a Sunday. So I had to, apart from baked goods, so I ran to the local bakery, and thank goodness they sell beer, but they only sell beer in cans. So I had to get a can. So we're not going to have the same usual lovely sound we normally have, but it's a beer nevertheless, and it's a Gösser, so another beer
right.
from Austria.
And it's also a nice sound. Opening a can is all right.
I justified it on that basis.
You may be forgiven. Here we go.
Oh, lovely.
A little disappointing, but I'm very much ready.
Are you ready for my can? Here we go.
Hit me. Oh, not bad at all. Could get used to that.
I'll give you a better sound. So, as mentioned, today Ralph and I will not be presenting any songs to you. We will instead be presenting the tools and equipment that we use every month, and we thought we would do it in the order kind of. It's called the signal chain, right? So the first thing in the chain all the way through to the very, very last thing, which is us kind of putting it into digital format. And I think we're going to start with our instruments, the things that we use to create the actual noises, right?
It's a good start.
And let's start with guitars, because we are both guitarists, right, Ralph? So tell everyone a little bit about your guitar collection.
Collection is a very strong word. I think for a start, we should already mention that, of course, that's what we use. It's what we end up having lying around. Obviously, there are many other ways to record anything, really. But we still hope it's going to be useful to some out there who are thinking about getting into home recording. Well, my main guitar anyway, is a Fender Telecaster. I'm looking at it now. It's... we actually talked about this yesterday, right? It's weird that even though probably the number one tool we use, or the tool we use, or we spend most time with recording anything, is obviously the software. We're going to come to that. But still, you don't actually ever develop a relationship to the software, and especially with my guitar, and I think many guitarists can relate to that, you do develop a certain love for the instrument, or a certain... connection. It's been a dream of mine for many years to get this thing. They are not the cheapest instrument in the world, especially if you want to get them American produced. So I've had it for the last 3 years now, and that's my main guitar. But I still also have my old guitar, which is a Swedish. It's called a Hackström, and I think I pronounced it correctly. Ultra Swede, and it's just right now I'm getting it set up to become my main kind of metal hard rock guitar, if ever in the future we end up doing a genre like that. So I'm getting heavier strings and some down tuning done on that.
Is that a little nod to our listeners to say vote for hardcore metal genres if they ever come up? Because you've already designed your guitar around that genre.
Well, I mean, I've been thinking, I I don't have an acoustic guitar, so that's already kind of out of the question. And I have two electrics. I've got my main guitar. What am I going to do with the other one? I hardly ever use it. So I just said, okay, I'm just going to have it set up for a very, very specific use and something that's very different to my main instrument. And yeah, I still can't say how it's going to play after it's coming back. Very heavy strings, but should be fun. Some chugging going on. What about yourself? What are your main guitars or instruments you use to create your songs?
So, just like you, I started with the guitar a long time ago, actually, learning to play the guitar. I think I was about 15, 16. I think the age that a lot of people start thinking about learning a musical instrument, right? And so I started off with a Fender Squier Strat. That was the guitar that I learned on. And then I loved the Fender. And ended up buying a Fender acoustic guitar rather than an electric guitar. And that's my baby, my Fender acoustic guitar. It's the guitar that I played the most. It's an electroacoustic guitar, so I can plug it in and be loud if I need to. I really love the fact that I can just kind of pick it up and play some nice acoustic things. And it's a bit bashed up now. It's traveled around the world a little bit, and it's got a few dents in it, but I think that adds to its charm.
I mean, I think you've had it ever since I knew you, right? Or basically all the time we've known each other.
Pretty much, yeah. And I bought it secondhand as well, so it wasn't even new when I got it. But it served me very, very well, and I'm very, very happy. One of the best purchases I think I've ever made. I've also got an electric guitar, which I bought about a year ago now. It's an Ibanez, and it's a kind of a jazz style guitar. It's one of these kind of hollow body ones, right? So the sound is quite full, and it lends itself really well to kind of cleaner music, getting some really nice tones out of the guitar from the fact that it's got this hollow body. I would say the one genre which it just physically cannot do is metal, because you're just going to get vibrations everywhere, right?
Probably not so. Good, yeah.
So here's my appeal to listeners. No, listeners, choose whatever genre you want, but bear in mind that if you choose any kind of hardcore rock genre, Ralph is going to love it, and he's got the exact right guitar to do it, and I'm going to have to do something very funky with my guitar to make it sound even remotely like a metal-style guitar. And I also have a third guitar, but that's a PRS Santana special edition.
Yes, I remember that one. That is actually really, that you can use for metal if you wanted to. You just don't have it with you, right?
And it's in the UK, unfortunately, but I'm already looking into ways to get it over here, just in case. But it's a great guitar in its own right, so it should be with me rather than sitting in a storage room, right?
It's still. I remember. I think I've seen a guitar once, and that was at a time when I didn't really know much about guitars. I mean, I still don't know a whole lot, but PRS is actually, that's a decent brand. So it's probably quite a nice guitar.
It was quite expensive. It was, in fact, a guitar that I bought secondhand as well. It was a display model in a guitar shop. So it was the one that people tested out, when you go into that very intimidating environment of a guitar shop where everyone seems to know more than you, and you have to, you're like, okay, well, I want to test this guitar. What do I do? I better play something that sounds good, and you inevitably fail. So that was one of those guitars that you could pick up off the wall and try, and it was, obviously looked after very well. So that's actually quite a good tip if you're ever looking for a secondhand instrument. Guitar shops often sell their display models very, very cheaply, and they've been looked after very well. Yeah, it's a good tip. So that's it for the guitars. The guitars tend to be plugged into something as well, don't they? And we actually have the same amplifier, right?
More or less, yes. Yeah. It's quite a magic box, really, to me. I mean, for a long time, I've used only a very small amplifier by Roland, right? A Microcube, it's called, which I still think is a pretty good amp. You also have a different version of that. But we both now upgraded to, the same brand, basically, Boss. So Boss and Roland are the same company from Japan. And they have the Katana range, which I think is a phenomenal amp for its money. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's really amazing. It can do everything and sounds amazing. And it works extremely well as a practice amp and works extremely well on the stage as well. And it's rare that you find that really cool combo where you can really happily play around with it at home and then take it to a stage and then crank it all the way up and get that is amazing sounds.
Yeah, and it's just, you even have like a little knob on there, which, obviously it's not that simple, but more wattage means more volume, right? And it goes all the way up to 100 watts, but at home you can turn it down all the way to 0.5. So you really get good sounds at a low volume, but you can play basically any stage with it. And really, there are no limitations to this amp, because as soon as you hit a certain size, which we usually don't, you're going to have it run through the PA anyway. And until then, this can fill any place up to, I don't know, a couple hundred people, and it should be fine. So, yeah.
Yeah, until we take our Songwriting Idiots, tour to stadiums, where we play all our songs live, we're probably not going to be using it at its full capacity. But when that day comes and we're playing Wembley Stadium, we are ready to go.
Madison Square Garden. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just a matter of time. I think it's also important to mention at this point of the podcast, when you hear Ralph and I being really enthusiastic about our instruments, our equipment, it really is genuine enthusiasm, because we are not sponsored by any of these people.
Yet.
Maybe one day we will be. But currently, we are not sponsored by any of these people, so we have no skin in the game. We are really telling you our honest feelings about the things that we're using, and there's a reason why we've bought them and we're still using them, and that is generally because we love them.
Yeah, and obviously there's no right or wrong here anyway, and especially when it comes to amps, you probably know that as well, but especially in the electric guitar community that I am a bit more a part of than you are, people still rage on about tube amplifiers, right? And the Katana isn't one of them. It's a solid state amp, and many people would disagree. But I think, come on, for the money, it is a phenomenal piece of equipment. Many would disagree, others would agree, and that's just the way it is. But we love it, and I think that's the important part.
We do indeed. So I think that's it for guitars, and we can probably move on to the kind of other instruments we have in our armory.
Yeah.
So personally, I've recently bought a keyboard. It's a Roland Go Keys keyboard, and it's not a full-sized keyboard. It's a little shorter, 60-something keys, I think it is, and it's fantastic. It's super light. It runs on batteries if you want it to, so you can take it to, I don't know, parties where there's no power in a field or something.
As you do.
If you're ever playing a very, very quiet festival. It sounds fantastic, and I've played it live a couple of times, and I'm a big fan. And it also very handily doubles up as a kind of MIDI controller, meaning that I can use it to play some of the things that you hear on our songs or my songs in the Songwriting Idiots podcast, be that horns or strings or piano, sometimes even guitar. I can play that on the keyboard, which is really, really cool. And it's not one of the controllers which is not touch responsive or things like that. It really feels like a proper keyboard. So I'm really, really happy with that, and I can fully recommend it, especially to anybody who's thinking of kind of starting out learning the keyboard, because it's not very expensive, sounds fantastic. It's another Roland product, right? And you can trust them for quality. You really can. Boss
Roland, do reach out to us. We are more than willing to be sponsored by you.
We already have all of your stuff, though. So the Roland Go Keys, look it up. If you're thinking about getting into the keyboard, a really, really good place to start.
Yeah. So I don't have a keyboard, and I don't even have a proper MIDI controller, which I'm going to change. So I'm going to probably upgrade. Right now, I'm only using a very small, also by a Japanese company, a Korg Nano Key, which is one of these things, for the money. It does what it's supposed to do, right? I think I bought it 10 years ago for, I don't know, 20 euros. And not touch responsive, an octave and a half, maybe 2 octaves of notes on there. And that's about it. And I've used this for the first 3 or 4 episodes of the podcast now. I'm going to upgrade to an Akai. I think that's how you pronounce it. Another Japanese brand, which is a bit more, up to the challenge, a bit more actual touch response, and it feels a bit more like a keyboard. But, I think the important thing is that a MIDI controller of a usual size, which is quite small, will never really feel like a piano, but it's also not the job it's doing. That's what I'm using. And technically I have one more instrument, which is a mandolin. So far I haven't used it, but it's actually quite a good one by Richwood. Quite happy with it. Bought it in Ireland, like a long time ago. And I used to play it, or I still do play it live when we play with our band, which we at some time in the future maybe we'll talk about. But on the podcast, not yet.
So we've discussed kind of the kind of acousticy kind of instruments we have, the electric instruments we have, and of course the most powerful instrument of all is the human voice, right? So we have to talk about our microphones and the way we record our vocals, and you also record your guitar, right? Sometimes,
usually actually,
for not only the songs that we write and record, but also the podcast that we record. So we both have the same microphone, and that microphone is the Shure SM58. It's a dynamic microphone, meaning that it's the kind of microphone that you often see in live performances, actually. It's really, really good at a whole bunch of things, and it's a bit of a workhorse, right? You see it all over the place, and I've had mine for 10 years now.
It's the number 1 best-selling mic in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So
There we go. And I can see why. The quality is fantastic, and it survives a lot of abuse. So I dropped it on our floor the other month. It's got a huge dent in the top of the little metal caging around it. Still works absolutely fine. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I actually saw a video somewhere about it, that they even have a quality control where they just drop it from, I don't know, a couple meters high just to see if it survives, and they are designed to actually do that. And I think in the past, it's been around since, I believe, the 60s, so it's quite an old mic. And there have been cases of people throwing it out airplanes and shit, and it survived everything. So crazy.
It just kills the person on the ground.
Probably does. Loads of incidents there. Yeah, great mic though. And right now I'm actually recording on the show as well, so that's what it sounds like for reference.
Great. And you also will record your vocals with it from now on, I guess, as well, right? It's a fairly new purchase for you as well, isn't it?
Yes, so I mean, it's a bit complicated because we are recording this in July 2020. We don't know when we're going to release this. So there's going to be a couple more episodes out by that time, probably. But we now basically did 3 episodes all the way to Motown. And I used it already on Motown. I didn't use it on the reggaeton because there were no... actually, I did for the vocals. But for Motown, I used it for vocals and for my guitar amp. And it works great for all these users, for voice, for the amp. And I find it a lot nicer to actually just mic the amp and hear what the amp sounds like in the room instead of going directly from the amp into the computer, which you could. But so far, it's a multi-purpose microphone. I'm sure, that the Shure 58 is not the best microphone for every occasion, but it is kind of it's a workhorse. It does a lot of things pretty well. While, of course, if you really want to use specific mics for specific purposes, you could always find something that fits that one purpose better. But as an all-round mic, I think it's pretty much unbeaten.
It's really, really great. So as I mentioned, I have that too. And I recently bought a second mic, and it's a condenser mic. And this is the mic that I'm using right now. It's by Rode. It's called the Rode NT1A. And it comes, if you like, as part of a package. So again, if you're new to kind of recording at home, highly recommend this because you get a whole bunch of stuff with it, such as a little shock mount, which takes all the vibrations out in case there's any, someone closes the door and it, creates a little vibration in the microphone.
That kind of stuff,
Yeah. It it has a pop guard, which is great as well, comes with it. And the mic is really, really good quality for the value. And a condenser mic is a little different to a dynamic mic, and it tends to focus more on studio vocals, things like that, where you want to get very high frequency directed sound. And for home vocal recording, the Shure works great, and will work great for a whole bunch of other instruments as well. But the Rode NT1A just takes up the vocals a notch. And this is the mic that I'm using now to record my vocals as well. So you can really see a difference between, or you can do a comparison between the vocals you hear from me now and Ralph's, if there's any. I think these mics really shine when you're recording proper vocals and you want to get that depth of frequency that the Shure maybe just quite doesn't have.
Yeah, I think, for example, with singing, you certainly hear it. Spoken word, not so much, really. Now, if you're listening in, you're going to obviously find differences in the way the two of us sound. But I think your mic, or I guess most good condenser mics, they really shine, for example, when, doing vocals, or, for example, acoustic guitar. There, I can really hear the difference.
I have to fully agree with you there. The acoustic guitar on the NT1A sounds amazing. Absolutely
and
amazing.
I would never mic an acoustic guitar with my Shure mic. I don't think it would sound good. It's too squash. I mean, I'm not an expert, but it's just the frequency range is quite more limited, right? So you're just not going to get this sparkle. You're not going to get the full range. And I really wouldn't want to do it. And but that's a difference, right? For most vocals, and especially for a loud guitar amp, I would always go with a dynamic mic just because it's a bit easier to handle. It basically, it accepts any input. It will never, break. It will never overdrive unless you just run it too hot. And you're not going to really run into many issues there.
No, exactly right. So
right.
I think microphones, we've spoken about how much we love them. And, budget-wise, we're working on limited budget here. And, of course, you could spend tens of thousands on microphones or any of this equipment, to be honest. And I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of cash right now. So we try and keep things to a totally reasonable low level.
I mean, our listeners know that Danny is a rich man and he's got all the money in the world. But everything we're talking about, the Shure is pretty much €100, almost exactly, and your condenser might be less than 200, right?
Yes, certainly less than 200, yeah.
Yeah.
For the bundle.
For the entire thing, right? And so that's the kind of levels we're talking here, yeah. I actually have one more mic. I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's a Zoom H4n, which is kind of a mobile recorder. And that I mainly use for sketching, song ideas, for songwriting. And for my other podcast, for the history podcast, I actually do like city tours where I walk around because it's battery run, right? But I don't actually use that all that much. Except maybe sometimes for like tambourines and stuff, because it's actually not a dynamic mic, it's also a condenser. So that is nice to do sometimes. All right, what is next? So we run either our instruments or our voices into the computer, but in between those two things is a little box, isn't there?
A little magic red box.
In our case. In most people's cases, let's be honest.
Unless you have a really weird, funky computer, you need to have something to plug your mics or instruments into because they don't have a USB connector at the end of them, right? So you have to plug it into something else, and this is called an interface. And we both have the same interface. One of them is the kind of earlier model. One of them is a slightly newer model. It's the Scarlett Focusrite 2i2, I think it's called. And again, it has to be the biggest and best-selling interface around because for value and functionality, it can't be beaten, right?
Yeah, we're again talking €100-ish, a bit more than that, sometimes depending on the model, right? And it's really, I would be surprised if it wasn't the best-selling interface on the market. Everyone has one, it feels. And of course, again, as with all these things, especially when it comes to instruments, but also when it comes to mics, and also when it comes to interfaces, you can spend as much money on it as you are willing to, right? You can spend €3,000 on an interface, and in a studio, you might just find that. But for our home use, I think the Focusrite Scarlett is just a great choice. It does what it's supposed to do. It gives you any number of, I think it ranges from 1 input all the way up to 4. Obviously, it's going to come with a higher price tag.
I think up to 8 or 16 I've seen as well.
Oh, even? All right. So they even have bigger ones. So you really have the choice there, right? And if you're just doing a podcast and if you're alone at home, you can actually buy the cheapest one with just 1 input. We both got the 2 input ones, right?
Exactly.
And there's a lot of flexibility there, but really it just does what it's supposed to do. And some people say there's a difference in sound when you upgrade to a more expensive interface. That might be true, but honestly, I'm not on a level to really judge that or need that.
Absolutely not. And I would say for the vast majority of people listening, the 1 or 2 input one is more than enough, because when are you ever going to need to record more than 2 microphones or an instrument and a microphone at the same time? The only reason I think you would maybe want to get more is if you have a band and would like to record multiple people at multiple times. Then, of course, the more inputs, the better, because you can record everybody live at the same time. But if it's just you or you and somebody else, 2 inputs should be more than enough.
And even for the songs we do, right? I don't usually or ever record guitar and vocals at the same time. I do them one after the other. So technically, yes, I use 2 inputs just because I don't have to switch around and, exchange the cables. But I could just do that and use 1 input because it's not going to be at the same time anyway.
Yep, absolutely right. So, I survived for a long time with just 1 input, and that was totally okay. So really 2 should be more than enough for the vast, vast majority of people. And from our little red box, our Focusrite, we now go into probably the most scary thing that we have and the thing that we spend most time with, the thing that's complicated and powerful and can do all these amazing things. And that's our digital audio workstation, or DAW for short, and that's a software program, right? It's on our computers, and it's what turns all of these sounds that we make and buttons that we press, it turns it into audio that we either record live or that we create through MIDI, and it allows us to create the MP3 audio that you hear on the podcast. And Ralph and I have 2 different DAWs, one for Windows and one for Mac. And I think you'll agree, Ralph, it's been a steep learning curve for both of us on these programs, because these are really software programs that everyone from amateurs all the way up to professional kind of score writers use to create, radio and cinema worthy sounds. So it's one of those things where the possibilities are endless, but it can be very hard to know where to start. So tell us a little bit about the DAW that you use.
Yeah, sure. So you were not entirely correct, because I use a DAW that could also run, for example, on a Mac. So it's actually multi-platform. It's called Reaper, and I don't think it's one of the most popular in terms of users, but it has a good reputation amongst beginners because it's very affordable. So, also yours, I think, is not super expensive. We're going to talk about that. But most DAWs and most very professional DAWs, for example, what is the main one called that many studios use?
Pro Tools.
Pro Tools, yeah. So Pro Tools, for example, or also Cubase and some of the other, there are many of them, but yeah, Pro Tools is probably the most famous one. They start at $500 or something, right? So it's some significant money there. And Reaper is only $60 for a license, for a individual license, they call it. So you can actually use that even commercially, as far as I understand it, as long as it's not kind of a actual full-blown studio. And even then, the full version is $200 something. And that will cover, I think, the current version plus the next 2, and they release a version every couple of years. So we're talking, for $60, you get 5, 6, 7, 8 years of Reaper. It's ridiculously cheap. And they also give you a 60-day trial period, and you can even use it a bit longer than that. So they are very, very easygoing. And I think it's a great program because it's the cheapest fully functioning DAW you have, or that is available, I think. And for me, really, I've had a great experience with it. It's very open. You can use different skins on it, they call it. So you can really change the look of it. And there are many people out there who just produce these skins, and it changes where the buttons are to make it work better for any application you have. So I actually run 2 versions of Reaper on my computer. One for doing music, where, everything is counted in bars and it's and not in time, and, very similar to usual DAW. And then I have a completely separate one that I'm running now for the podcast, where everything is kind of reduced down. It's all calculated in minutes and seconds, not in bars and not in beats. And just different functionality. And that's really cool. So you can really get all of that for free on top of the normal Reaper. I mean, I guess you can also buy some of these. And it's just very flexible. And that's what I enjoyed. But also it brings challenges because the more open a system is, the more options you find. And especially with Reaper, you have this luxury issue that you can buy as many plugins as you want and introduce them to Reaper. You can just load them in, and it will basically accept anything, any instrument you want, digital instruments, if you want horns, if you want strings, whatever. And it's very challenging to understand what you really need. And that's something that is a bit different maybe to something like Logic that you're using, where you have a lot of these things pre-installed, which with Reaper you don't really. You only have a kind of more limited selection. But overall, yeah, it's I'm very happy with it, especially for a beginner, no matter what program you're using. I think it even runs on Linux, so anything goes. And for the money, it's just really a no-brainer. You can try it out for free for 2 months, just see how it works for you. And then you can get a very cheap license, which I encourage anyone to just try out, because really it does at least 99% of what you need. I have not experienced any problems so far. There hasn't been a moment where I thought, okay, I need to upgrade to something else. And it's already, as it is, it's daunting enough. Enough to learn.
It really is. Out of curiosity, Ralph, if you wanted to buy, for example, a plugin for I don't know, like a synth plugin, what kind of price range do people tend to offer them for? I mean, there'll be free ones, of course, but like for what kind of prices do people tend to advertise their plugins for?
Oh, I don't know too much about it, but it's a huge range. So I think at the lower end, you get a lot of really, really good plugins. I mean, you already get good plugins for free, but then you have a big bunch of actually amazing plugins in the below $100 mark. So I think around $50, $60, $70, euros, whatever, you already get a decent amount of really, really well-programmed little plugins. But, on the pro level for studio producers, they're, easily 4 digits, no problem. You can spend as many thousands of dollars as you want on these things.
Okay, got it. But the free ones sound amazing. So
yeah, I mean, there are some things, for example, on El Patron, my reggaeton song, I used a ridiculous synth that has all the sounds in the world and more. It's, I forgot the name. And, it has 200 presets. But then you can still change every parameter of the sound. So you could, if you knew what you were doing, which I don't, you could just change these parameters and go from anywhere from like a string sound to a, EDM sub-bass sound. You can do anything with it, right? So yeah, great stuff out there.
I've been really impressed with Reaper. I was a bit skeptical at the beginning because it's it's not expensive. And plugins are for free, some of them, and you think, okay, well, what's the catch here? And it just seems to work really, really well. And it's created by a bunch of people that I think are very passionate about their product. Yeah. And have made something that is actually a really, really good place to start.
Yeah, it's really lightweight, and especially if you have an older computer, you might run into troubles with a bigger DAW, and Reaper is very lightweight, so that might be another reason to take it or choose it.
I can tell you a little bit about my DAW as well, which is maybe a bit more well known to listeners, especially if they're Mac users. Yeah, it is only available for Mac, which is obviously a limitation, and is actually the reason why I bought a Mac back in 2011 was exclusively for this, and for essentially no other reason. And I'm so glad I did. So I use a DAW called Logic Pro X, and I've had it for the last 10 years ish, actually. And it is ridiculously powerful and ridiculously creative and is just amazing. It's not particularly intimidating because it has very, very good presets. So we were talking about plugins earlier on, and you have to kind of go and source your plugins to make a synth sound or to make a trumpet sound or strings or piano or whatever.
Usually, yes, especially these instruments,
These are all preset and loaded into Logic for you, ready to go, and they are of extremely high quality. And you can tweak everything. You can also load external plugins too, so you're not limited to the ones that are just on Logic. I could take the same ones as you as well and plug them in and have the same kind of sound. It's very, very intuitive, and there's loads and loads of tutorials. I guess it's the same for Reaper as well. There'll be lots of tutorials on YouTube, but for Logic, really, there are hundreds and hundreds of tutorials. It's probably, after Pro Tools, the most used DAW, I would say.
Probably,
and they've just released a new update for it as well, the biggest update in a long time, which adds very, very cool features. And it's a DAW that is so good for all different types of musicians, right? It's fantastic for people that want to play live. They've got live loops where you can DJ essentially and play sounds on the fly. It's great for people like us who just want to record these kind of bizarre songs that we come up with every month. And it's also used for film scoring and music scoring, and it's been used to release radio hits. Famously, Umbrella by Rihanna was written on Logic using an Apple loop, and that's another very cool thing about Logic. It's an Apple product, and Apple loops are kind of royalty-free, license-free. Well, you get a license to these sounds, and they're loops of music. And
our jingle, right?
Like our jingle is made up of entirely of Apple loops, and you can play them together, you can mess them all up, you can do whatever you want to them. And the beat, it was actually the beat for Rihanna's song Umbrella. It's quite an iconic beat, actually. They just heard it and they were like, that's the one, and they just took it and then off they went, and they made the entire song in Logic, and it was number one for a long time. It's a lot of fun to use Logic, and one of the things that I love about Logic for beginners is that there are fantastic presets that you can use to get you through that really murky water at the beginning when you don't have a clue what you're doing. For example, there are things called compressors, and they are quite intimidating because there's a whole bunch of virtual knobs and dials, and it's very scary.
What is a threshold?
What's a knee? And you can click on presets, and it kind of guides you along the way. Same for EQ. EQ is really important when you're recording a song. It's for those of you who didn't know what EQ is, you probably remember on old hi-fis they had kind of various little levers or switches with certain frequencies on them, and you could raise the bass or the mids or the high bits, the treble. It's the same on amplifiers. That's what an EQ is, right? You can just take certain frequencies. Obviously, the higher the hertz, the higher the sound, the higher the frequency. And you can increase that in volume. And what that does is it makes a bit of space for certain instruments. If you've got your voice, for example, that normally sits in a particular range, a particular hertz range. And if your vocal is getting a bit lost behind all the other instruments, you can just make certain frequencies of your voice louder so that they cut through the mix, they call it, right?
Very common issue with electric guitars and voice.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And piano as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, so EQ is something that I've only really started playing around with properly in the last year or so. And up until then, I always use presets. I always use things like vocal refresh or male vocal lead. And it very handily kind of gave you a very basic kind of idea of what the EQ for a male vocal should look like. And then you could say, that sounds great, I'm going to leave it. Or, maybe I'll try and play around with it a little bit. It gives you a really good starting place. And that's one of the things that I really love about Logic. It gives you these great starting places. And for years and years and years, I never even moved away from the starting places. That was it. I used only presets because I was too scared to change them. Now I have a dangerous amount of knowledge, so I can just enough to mess it up.
Dangerous half knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. So I now start messing around with the presets and inevitably make everything sound worse. So Logic Pro X, really, really great. It is more expensive than your DAW. I've just checked the price. This is in July, and I'll tell you it in euros. When I bought it, it was 170, I think it was. And following the update, they've increased the price. So it's now 230 euros.
Okay. It used to be a lot more expensive like 10 years ago, from what I understand. So it already got quite a lot more affordable over the years. And if you compare it to something like Pro Tools, it's still pretty much a bargain.
Value-wise, I cannot fault it in any way. For 230 euros now, you get a lifetime license, you get all the further future upgrades, and it's just so much fun to use, and it's very hard to do anything totally wrong with all the presets and all of the instruments preloaded that really sound amazing. So all the songs that you hear from me are all made in Logic.
Yeah, same here with Reaper, obviously. But that about does it, right? So we talked about the entire signal chain, from our instruments, our voices, the ways to amplify them, mics and amps. We talked about interfaces and software. And that's basically it. There's a lot of magic going on in the software, of course, but probably I think that was a good overview of what we use.
I agree. And what we'll do is we can put links to all of our equipment in the notes to the podcast, right? So people can,
if we don't forget.
People can, always possible. So check out the notes to the podcast, and you can see, for example, the microphones that we use, the interfaces that we use, and have a look at them. And if they tickle your fancy, you can go ahead and buy and have fun.
Yeah. So I think even though none of those brands are paying us, we would endorse everything we mentioned. Doesn't mean it's right for everyone, but it's well worth trying it out. And I mean, most jobs, wherever you are, in the US, Sweetwater, or in Andertons in the UK, or Thomann in Europe, you have a money back guarantee usually, so you can just try things out. And I would highly encourage doing just that, and just get them, try it out for a month or whatever period they grant you, and send it back if you don't like it, and try something else.
And you can always blame us as well.
Of course, and you should.
And the best way to blame us is by following us on Instagram, for example.
Oh,
you like one. That? You like that? At Songwriting Idiots. You can follow the podcast, of course, wherever you listen. Please subscribe. And don't forget to submit genres and vote for whatever genre and topic is online when you're listening to this podcast.
Exactly. Nothing much else to add. And I'm looking forward to our next proper episode with our next song. I'm already quite intimidated, but it was nice to get this out of the system today. And yeah, again, everything we talked about will be in the show notes. You'll hear from us soon. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.